I'm Suruti.
And I'm Hannah.
And this is RedHanded. Welcome to your weekly dose of all things weird, wonderful, and true crime. And today it's very weird, not so wonderful.
No, I would venture the least wonderful. I've certainly not feeling that wonderful about it. This one's super duper gross, but it's not gross until right at the very end.
Yeah, I messed about a lot with this script about where to put the big sitch.
It's quite the sitch.
Yeah, and I don't know. I've taken some creative liberties in where it's been placed, and it's a big bang end.
Well, that is your job as a journalist.
I am a journalism, so you are correct. Have we got anything to say?
No, it's still October. No, is it? No, we're in November now. Okay, well, forget everything I just said. We're coming to you from the past.
If you haven't checked out our brand new show that is exclusively on Spotify, which is called Sinister Societies,
yes,
you might want to consider doing that.
So make sure you either check out patreon.com/RedHanded or take yourself over exclusively to Spotify, where you can find our brand new show, Sinister Societies, or if you're feeling especially spicy, do both.
This month, our bonus episode is going to be a really interesting one. We're going to do the gunpowder plot, guys. Guy Fawkes.
Oh, yeah.
In all his Catholic effigy burning glory.
Yep.
So get ready. Plugs done. Let's get on with today's case. And today's case is one that has been making headlines for the best part of a decade now. And it was only this year, in 2021, that justice was finally served. The story of what happened to 13-year-old Dylan Redwine is a bizarre and tragic one, filled with some honestly, truly stomach-churning twists. We will warn you when we get to the strictly no eating part.
Yeah, you've got some time. You've got a while. Time.
But get yourself mentally ready. And for those of you who know this case, you already know what's coming. So Dylan's parents, Elaine Hall and Mark Redwine, had been married for 18 years. They had 2 children and lived in Durango, Colorado. Which Durango just sounds like it should be in Australia.
I, to be honest, didn't know a huge amount about this case, and I saw that and I was like, oh, this has got to be Australia. Like Burrawang is another one in Australia, which I think is just bizarre. But that's probably me being extremely white. But yes, it does sound like it should be in Australia.
Yeah, but it's in Colorado. That's where we're hanging out, basically, for the entirety of this episode. So Elaine and Mark, they're married for 18 years, but in 2007, they ended up getting divorced. And Elaine took the boys and moved to Colorado Springs, which is about 300 miles away. This is what I love. When I said she moved 300 miles away, I was like, oh my God, where did she go? She's still in the same state.
One of the things I envy about Americans, I envy being able to live in whatever climate you choose without needing a visa.
That is a very good point. I do.
I'm very envious of that.
I mean, that is good. The thing I am probably the most envious of Americans is their vast array of fast food options. Try as I might, I cannot find a Popeye's chicken substitute here in the UK.
No, it's just not.
But
it makes it so much sweeter when you finally get to a Popeye's though, doesn't it? If you've been waiting for years.
Oh my God. When we eventually get to the US on tour, I'm going to eat so much Popeye's chicken.
I'm not to roll you on stage.
I'm not going to fit in any of the outfits that I will bring with me. What was I going to say? If you're going to have fried chicken in this country, what's your go-to? Because I desperately was craving some the other day.
So I have a similar problem in that the best fried chicken in the world, in my opinion, is Korean fried chicken, which, listen, children. The best fried chicken in the world comes from barbecue fried chicken in Changwon, South Korea.
There you go. Facts. Facts is facts.
And that's it. I've never found anything that is even the Korean restaurants here don't do it properly. No, Dixie fried chicken is terrible. Don't bother.
Oh, gee, I was going to say... I will fuck with a Dixie fried chicken.
We can do better.
The only thing is, the Dixie fried chicken, at least the franchise that is near me in Leighton, they do, the hot wings they do are genuinely hot. And I can get on board with that.
Okay.
I would say, but I would always prioritize a Morley's over a Dixie.
Interesting.
If I can get to a Morley's.
Yeah.
There's not that many of them around.
They're all in South London.
That's what I was going to say. They're all in South London.
I did a bad thing yesterday.
Oh, what did you do?
So I stayed late at the office finishing up the tour show because they were in the past. The tour hasn't happened yet, but as you're listening to it, the tour has happened.
Yes.
And I was staying late in the office and I was in a foul mood yesterday. So I was like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm just gonna order some disgusting chicken.
Yes.
And I ordered from somewhere on Deliveroo, so you know it's fancy. It's called Butchie's Buttermilk Fried Chicken.
Oh, I've walked past it and it's always fucking heat. As in, there's Deliveroos are just pouring out of it.
Yes, it's very good.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a good selection. And they have a very funny joke on their menu, which I will find. So their popcorn chicken is called Smalls and their large popcorn chicken is called Biggie.
There you go. That's they, you know.
Sponsored by whatever the Butchie's Buttermilk Fried Chicken.
Sponsored by whatever.
Sponsored by whatever the fuck you want. I don't care anymore.
Back to the story. So Elaine takes the kids and she moves 300 miles away, but still stays in the exact same state that Mark is living in.
And somehow we ended up at fried chicken.
Yes. They're both still in Colorado, which I'm sure has delicious fried chicken. It also looks very beautiful. And so, like many children in this kind of a situation, Dylan lived with his mum and would spend half of all of his holidays with his dad back in Durango. And it was during one of these holiday visits, for Thanksgiving, that on the 18th of November 2012, Dylan boarded a plane to go and stay with Mark. The problem was, however, that Dylan really didn't want to go. Mark's place was super isolated. It's like all in the mountains and stuff. And it also doesn't seem that Dylan was all that close to his dad. But the visit was court-ordered. And Dylan, being only 13, had no choice. His brother Corey, however, who by this point was over 18, didn't have to go. And I think that is possibly quite telling.
So Elaine put her son on a plane and told him to at least try and have a good time, reassuring him that he'd be home before he knew it. When Dylan arrived, Mark picked him up at the airport and the two went to a nearby Walmart to grab some staying over essentials. And then they went to a McDonald's drive-thru to get dinner. Dylan was caught on CCTV during these trips, and it would be the last time that the 13-year-old would be seen alive in public ever again. The next day, so the 19th of November, Dylan was planning on meeting a friend at 6:30 a.m. Pardon?
And again, I think that this is particularly telling. The idea that Dylan goes and stays with his dad and then he is making plans the next day at 6:30 a.m. Yeah, like I said, I think it just proves a 13-year-old that's willing to do that. Mm-hmm. That's how much he doesn't want to be there. And he'd actually asked, apparently, Mark, his dad, if he could just stay at that friend's house that night. I know. Hannah's making a face like it's so uncomfortable. And it is. And Mark had said no. It's just a sad state of affairs.
Yeah. But it's even sadder because Dylan never actually turned up for his 6:30 a.m. play date. At 6:46 a.m., his friend texted him saying, "Where are you?" And Dylan never replied. Apparently, Mark had actually been meant to drive his son to meet this friend. So what had happened? Well, according to the story that Mark would later tell police, the day before, he and Dylan had come home from the airport and Dylan had fallen asleep on the sofa. The next morning, Mark woke up and left the house to run some errands at around 7:30 a.m.
He says that when he left, he saw Dylan still asleep on the sofa with the TV running. Mark claims that he left Dylan to it and was gone for about 4 hours. Which again, your kid comes stay with you for Thanksgiving, who you don't see very often, who lives 300 miles away. What are you doing running errands for 4 hours?
I mean, for many reasons that shall become clear, and we'll leave those reasons alone. The reasons we have up until this point are already proof that Mark Redwine is a shitty dad. It doesn't surprise me, but like, yes, it's a bullshit thing to do, to be like, oh, I never see you. Bye, be back in 4 hours. I'm going to do some shit I could have done yesterday, but I didn't.
Exactly. So he then also tells the police that he got back to his house at around 11:30 a.m. And according to Mark, by this point, Dylan was gone. So, assuming that his son had gone to meet up with his friends, Mark Redwine says that he went and had a nap. I think it's important to clear it up just because I was a little bit confused about this at the start. Obviously, Dylan lived in Durango when he was a child and then he went and lived in Colorado Springs. So he does have childhood friends in this area. So he does know some people around there. So Mark just says he thinks he's gone off there and now he goes for a nap. And then he says he woke up from this nap at about 1 p.m. And at this point, according to him, Dylan was still not home. So he tried to call him and text him. But when he got no reply, Mark then said he tried to call Dylan's friends in the area, but apparently no one had seen or heard from him since the previous night. So at 4:32 p.m. on the 19th of November, Mark texted Elaine, his ex-wife and Dylan's mum, asking if she'd heard from their son and saying that he'd been trying to reach him all afternoon with no luck. Needless to say, Elaine, being 6 hours away by car, was horrified.
That's a terrifying message to receive.
Yeah.
To be like, no, he's with you, you fucking piece of shit deadbeat. He's not winning any dad competitions.
Oh no, and it just gets worse and worse.
And it's probably worth saying at this stage in the game that Mark Redwine texting Elaine that their son was missing is quite odd. Surely you would call.
I feel like that's worth a call. That's worth a quick call. At least a voice note. A text.
I think a voice note is worse. I really do. I can't even be bothered to move my fingers to relay this message to you. So I'm just going to voice note it. No.
You're right, that is worse. Yeah, he should be calling.
Yes, absolutely. But whatever the reason, these messages are worth discussing in and of themselves. Mark says that he didn't call her because the pair were embroiled in a bitter custody battle following a toxic divorce, and that with relations so tense, it was better to just text. No, it's not. That is not going to win you any points anywhere.
Especially not in the battleground of the custody battle arena.
Oh my God, can you imagine? Like, that's not really going to instill any court with any faith that you can do a good job as a father.
Mm-hmm.
Firstly, missing on my watch, and I can't even be bothered to ring you about it. Not stacking up dad points.
No, and just in case anybody is forgetting, Dylan was 13 years old.
I'm Helen Anderson.
And I'm Danny Howard.
And Devils in the Dark is back. So settle in for another season of truly shocking killers, from horrific family annihilators.
Oh God, I don't want to know.
He was going to be the one who fathered all the new children in the world.
Women on a mission to murder.
Defo Grand Theft Auto. Cheat me in a helicopter. I need a rocket launcher. Got all my guns. Got all my cars. Motel rooms. Yeah.
And everything in between.
Brand new episodes out 29th of August with new killers every Monday.
Search for Devils in the Dark on your favourite podcast app and make sure to follow so you never miss an episode.
See you soon.
Meet Charlie. She loves dogs.
Guilty.
From Wookiees to Treatos, she powers her pup empire with Shopify.
The sales won't stop.
With Charlie's tech needs sorted, she can focus on turning her home business into a global operation. From in-store to social, connect with customers wherever and whenever, so they don't go barking up the wrong tree. Yes, boy. Join Shopify, the commerce platform powering millions of businesses worldwide. This is Possibility, powered by Shopify. Sign up for a free 14-day trial at shopify.co.uk/try22. Go to shopify.co.uk/try22 to start selling online today.
But whatever the reason, real or fake, for these text messages, they are worth discussing in their own right. In previous texts with Elaine about Dylan, Mark texts very casually, even sloppily. He's so whatever in the planning stages of Dylan coming to stay. For example, Elaine had texted him multiple times on the day Dylan was travelling because his flight had been cancelled. Mark ignored all of these messages, and then when Elaine, clearly worried about her 13-year-old son making it safely to his dad or not, she asks again if Mark got him from the airport, and Mark just says he didn't turn up.
I was reading these texts.
I would be in the car.
Yeah, and my jaw was on the floor, because you see them. Elaine is like, I've tried to text you multiple times. Dylan's flight's delayed. Dylan's tried to call you. His flight is delayed. Is everything okay? And then there's a gap of time where I assume Dylan was to his mum like, it's fine, mum, I'm on the plane. And then she's like, Mark, have you picked him up? And he's like, he didn't turn up. Like, are you fucking serious?
Elaine follows this up with the patience of a saint, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Is his flight delayed again? Is that why? Exclamation mark. Preceded by a question mark. And Mark just says, I don't know.
Yeah.
I would be in the car.
He's the worst.
Yeah, truly.
I really tried to write this. In my head, I thought in a way that we weren't giving away everything that we thought about Mark Redwine. But clearly I have failed.
So it's my fault. I can't hold myself back.
We just know what's about to happen, guys. So sorry, there is literally no tension in this episode. But now, after Dylan has gone missing and he's texting Elaine, he suddenly sounds super formal in all of his messages. And then he sounds, the classic, incredibly defensive. When Elaine is panicking, he just replies to her saying things like, and this is a quote, "I am extremely concerned at this point."
Okay.
No one texts like that.
No one texts like that. There is no turn of phrase in the history of the English language that pisses me off more than "at this point." Which, like, it's always in such a weird, like, I feel like people use it in such weird instances. Like, policemen are like, "Oh, just mace them at this point." What? That makes no fucking sense.
No. I think the one that does it for me is maybe after many a year in a corporate email environment is let's just touch base. I say this as someone who has been guilty of using that phrase many a time. I love all of the like, you must have seen it, and this is like so not even fucking funny because it's so old school, but it's just like all of the translations. So it's like the let's touch base, what it actually means, etc. And there was such...
My favorite one is like when you change kind regards to just regards, it's saying fuck off and die. Yes. I literally wish you were dead.
I saw a tweet the other day that was like, someone just sent an email from work and she signed off anyway, comma, her name, and it was the best thing I've ever seen, which I do love.
I also love when it's as per my previous email, bitch, can you fucking read?
Yeah. But my favorite, this is actually from a series of Hinge prompts that I have seen, which is quite funny. I don't know who the man was who originally started this because I'd quite like to meet him, but I've seen it at least 3 times now, and it's still quite funny. Is one of the Hinge prompts you can choose is "my mantra is," which is probably the worst prompt. Unless it's very funny, your answer is very funny.
It's big beats at the best get high all the time.
Unless that is it, which I would obviously accept hard. So this person's was, "My mantra is, could you do this? If not, no worries."
But reader, there were worries.
"If not, no worries" is the most British line that you could ever say.
Yeah. Actually, would you like to run over me with your car instead of doing the thing I've asked? That's your job?
Thank you.
That you make money doing?
We'll touch base on it later. So anyway, getting back to Mark and Elaine, he's sending her all of these bullshit texts saying things like, "I'm very concerned at this point." And when Elaine asks Mark how this could have happened, like how he could have lost their fucking son, Mark starts to say things like, "You're blaming me. I'm trying to find him. And I'm doing all that I can," which is my personal favourite.
This is the end of the podcast because I'm dead now.
Yeah. Mark Redwine killed Hannah, allegedly. I mean, honestly, is that how a parent would speak if their child was missing? I just don't believe it. Surely a normal parent would be racked with guilt and would be blaming themselves, rightly or wrongly. I'm not saying that a parent should blame themselves in that situation, but they would, because that would be natural.
I completely agree, but like there's no IQ test for having children. No, there are a lot of really terrible parents out there.
Of course. But you know, he's not painting himself in glory at this point.
Absolutely not. Not even close.
So, in any case, after this text from Mark, Elaine freaks out and she calls the authorities, she calls Dylan's friends, and she calls her lawyer. Now, some people, including Mark Redwine, have made a big thing of Elaine calling her lawyer at this point. Because what they're making out is, to me, it's as if it's some way for her to dig the knife in and stir up the custody battle by ratting on Mark or something. He's like, of course she called her lawyer because she's doing it to, you know, take the kids away from me. You fucking lost one of them.
Yeah, you don't deserve them.
And as we'll go on to see, Elaine had her reasons for going straight down a legal route, but we'll come back to that later. It was only at 6:30 that evening that Mark called the local police. And maybe you're thinking, well, you know, it's not that long that he waited. Dylan was only missing that morning. It's only 6:30 and he does have friends in the area, etc. But the thing that should have rung alarm bells was that Dylan hadn't sent a single text message or answered one single call since 9:37 the night before. This is a 13-year-old boy. His phone is missing too. And this isn't some like a particularly interesting personality trait, but everyone who knew him was like, oh, he was always on his phone. So is everybody. But what I mean is like, there's no way that a 13-year-old be gone for that long and not send one text, not send one call. None of his friends have heard from him. So where would he be? Of course, that's suspicious.
Absolutely.
So yeah, if you have to ask yourself, we know that Dylan wasn't that keen on coming down to Durango. And we know he wasn't that keen on hanging out with his dad. But when you look at the text that Dylan had been sending in the lead up to his trip there, he had been excited about seeing his childhood friends. So where would he have gone on his own, and why?
Dylan's belongings were also missing from Mark's house, including his fishing rod. Mark kept telling the police that Dylan must have gone off fishing and maybe got lost somehow. Like we said, the area that Mark lived in was very isolated and rugged. It's all forests and mountains, and if someone didn't know where they were going, they could easily get lost. But Elaine was adamant that that couldn't have been what happened. Dylan didn't even like fishing. He couldn't even tie his own line. Elaine and Dylan, unlike Mark and Dylan, were very close. But, caveat, as much as a mum can be with her 13-year-old son, he's definitely got some secrets she doesn't know about. But looking at their texts, she was constantly checking in on him during his journey. And Dylan always replied to her. On the day he was leaving, Elaine was in classic mum mode, telling Dylan that she was proud of him for making the journey to go and see his dad on his own, and for doing so well keeping in touch with her. And she's really cute, saying things like, "You're flying like a pro," which I'm sure would have made teenage Dylan feel cringe. But he always replied to his mum. Until, that is, the evening of the 18th of November. The day he got to his dad's. Elaine texted Dylan at 7:20 p.m. saying that she missed him already, and then again at 10:09 asking if he was okay. This time, there was no reply from Dylan. The next day at 12:07 p.m, Elaine texted Dylan saying, "I miss you, how are you?" Nothing. And then at 2:35 p.m, Elaine messaged Dylan, "Please be safe, son." And again, nothing.
With the police now involved and Dylan having been gone all night, the search intensified. And authorities soon discovered more worrying news. Dylan's phone still hadn't been used at all. Elaine is now obviously beside herself, and she begins to accuse Mark of having done something to Dylan. When the police talk to Mark, he says that he hasn't got a clue what's going on. He says that he and Dylan hadn't argued. Nothing had happened. According to Mark, like he said, Dylan had been asleep, with the TV on and Nickelodeon running, when he'd last seen him. He said nothing was out of the ordinary. And this made Elaine even more suspicious, because she knew her son, and she knew that he hadn't watched Nickelodeon for years. He's 13, he's watching MTV.
Mm-hmm.
And she says this in an interview we'll talk about later, where she's like, "You don't even know your son well enough to lie, because he wouldn't have been watching Nickelodeon."
No 13-year-old is watching Nickelodeon.
No.
In the world.
No.
Unless it's Kenan and Kel.
Yes. I don't know when I started moving away from that kind of thing and into more like MTV.
I didn't have Sky.
No.
I just had Paw Provision.
No, me too, actually. Me too.
So going to a friend's house, if they had Cartoon Network, that was
God,
like
yeah.
Nirvana.
But anyway, Mark is making himself look more and more like he's lying. And then another ex-wife of Mark's, a woman named Betsy Horvitz, also had her doubts about Mark. She came forward and told police that she thought Mark absolutely could have harmed Dylan. Because, she said, when they got divorced and went through their own difficult custody battle over their 2 children, Mark had apparently told Betsy's sister, and this is a quote, "I would kill the kids before I let her have them."
Dad of the year.
Yeah, I mean, so much of this story is like, Mark Redwine, stop talking.
Yeah.
And Mark had made it absolutely no secret how angry he was that Elaine had been given full custody of their kids. So, again, you can see that there is a motivation there being hinted at by Betsy. Betsy also revealed on camping trips that she and Mark had taken when they were married, he had allegedly told her that if he ever needed to hide a body, he would do so in the mountains. That's a red flag. What? Imagine going on a camping holiday with your partner and he's like, "This is where I'd hide a body."
I would probably say that.
Again, this guy, Mark Redwine, please just pick up your phone and Google a picture of him and watch any 10-second clip of him speaking. This man has no sense of humor.
Okay, I think I probably wouldn't say, "Oh, this is where I would hide a body." I would just explain all the reasons why the mountain is a good place to hide a body.
And then you also probably wouldn't say, "And if you try to take our kids away from, I will fucking kill them before I let you take them."
Yeah, no, I would not say that. Betsy's history with Mark was part of the reason behind why we suspect that Elaine called the police herself, and why she called her lawyers. Mark also had a track record of not returning his children, the ones that he had with Elaine and Betsy, on time after court-ordered visits. In each case, the police had to be called, and it was only then that Mark had given the kids back. But he always just claimed that it was a mistake or an oversight. Buy a watch. You can set an alarm on your phone.
But the thing is, he's so obviously doing it on purpose. He loves to basically fuck with people. That's the vibe you get with Mark.
But despite Elaine and Betsy's suspicions, the police just thought that Dylan had run away from home. Mark had also told them the only thing that could have upset Dylan was that he had seen some custody or court summons papers that Mark had left out. Again, terrible dad points. You don't leave that shit lying around for your kid to see. How inconsiderate. And this runaway theory was bolstered when a local postal worker came forward saying that she'd seen two boys walking along the road near Mark's house on the day that Dylan had vanished. This witness, who knew Mark Redwine, apparently thought to herself, oh, that's Dylan.
As the days passed, things looked worse and worse for Dylan. On the 24th and 25th of November, so a week after he had gone missing, cadaver dogs picked up a scent in the woods near his dad's house. But when the search parties, including divers and sonar equipment, were brought in, they found nothing. So now the FBI got involved. And tensions between Mark and Elaine hit the roof. Elaine was convinced that Mark had done something to Dylan. He was angry about the divorce, the fact that Elaine had got full custody, and that he had to pay child support for kids that never even wanted to see him. Elaine also claimed that he was pissed because she was in a new relationship, and this was his way to get back at her. But Mark pointed the finger right back at Elaine, saying that she likely abducted Dylan herself in an attempt to frame him and take his kids away for good.
False flag operation.
Exactly.
I've recently learned what that term means, and now I can't shut up.
But in reality, neither parent was considered a suspect. In fact, the police had basically nothing.
On the 29th of November, authorities did search Mark's house, where they found Dylan's blood on the corner of a coffee table, on the floor of the living room, and on the sofa. But most of these samples were mixed, and only one spot could be positively identified as being Dylan's blood only. So it didn't seem like it was that much blood. And after all, he was a teenage boy. His blood could have ended up there in a number of different ways. I think the first week I was living in my flat, I cut my hand open with a knife. My blood's all over that place.
You could Gone Girl someone.
Truly, it's crossed my mind. So that leaves our police department slamming into yet another dead end, and the case went cold. In February 2013, so that's 3 months after Dylan disappeared, desperate for answers, more awareness of the case, and for some engagement from her ex-husband, Elaine called Mr. Moneybags worth more than Beyonce, Dr. Phil. I'm sure she didn't call him directly. I'm sure she spoke to a researcher, maybe a producer, possibly a runner, who knows. And this was the first time Elaine and Mark were meeting face to face since their son vanished, which in itself is a very weird vibe.
And this whole episode, the whole fucking, I don't even want to call him doctor because I've recently discovered that actually he's not allowed to practice anything. And I think apparently he's not really allowed to call himself a doctor. I'm not sure. It's very
every
confusing.
time I hear about it, it's a different answer.
I know, this is the thing, I'm not really sure. But anyway, let's just call it that. And I did actually watch this episode before we even decided to cover this case on here. I think I watched it like nearer the time that it actually happened. It's fucking wild. It's like 2 episodes. It's like a 2-parter because it's so fucking crazy. I so badly, we're going to talk about the show. We're going to talk about some of the things that come out on the show. I desperately wish we could play clips, but we cannot because Dr. Phil will blow us off the internet.
Yeah.
There will just be a red-handed shaped hole in the internet.
We quite like being on the internet. It's gone well for us so far. So we like to stay there. So we're not about to take on Dr. Phil.
Mm-hmm. We will die.
No, ma'am.
No.
No way, no how.
No. I apologise for even questioning whether you're a doctor. Please don't sue us.
Some of the Dr. Phil episode is as expected. Elaine confronts Mark saying that she thinks he's done something to Dylan. And it's actually quite heartbreaking because Elaine is so clearly devastated and Mark comes across as ice cold. And we know that people deal with grief differently. That's a baseline fact. But that doesn't really seem like what's going on with Mark. He barely talks about Dylan. Instead, he's more focused on attacking his ex-wife and deflecting. He has no input to give at all, even though he had been the last person to see Dylan. He has no input to give at all, even though he was the last person to see Dylan, his son, alive, and his son Dylan went missing from his house, and he has nothing to say.
He has like nothing. He has no answers, no explanations, no thoughts, no inklings, no idea. And the things he does say make absolutely no fucking sense. And interestingly, I thought Elaine and Corey, who is, as we said, Dylan's older brother, both talk about Dylan in the present tense. So if anybody's watched the Dr. Phil show, you know that when a guest comes on, they do like a little VT before where they've been interviewing them beforehand and then they edit it all together. And in these bits, Elaine and Corey are both like, we just want to find Dylan. We want to find Dylan. We want to bring him home. I can't wait to see him again. They're talking about him in the present tense. Elaine even says he's 14 years old now because his birthday was while he was missing. Mark, on the other hand, guess what I'm about to say? It's not going to be much of a shocker. He talks about Dylan in the intro of the Dr. Phil show in the past tense. He says things like, and I shit you not, this is a quote, I wish I could play it, I can't. I loved that boy. He was great. Jesus Christ. If I'm missing for 3 months and all my dad has to say is, I loved that girl, she was great.
He'll say, I told her she shouldn't have worn a blue swimming costume. I told her they'd never find her body.
But she was great.
I've actually, just now, this very moment, thought of your perfect job.
Oh.
A grammar murder detective.
Ugh.
Where you just pick apart the way people talk about people that are dead and you'd be like, it was them.
Oh my God.
The tenses are all over the place.
Someone give me a show, please. I love it. I love it. That is the perfect job, you're right. Oh my
Grammar
God.
detective, astronaut, dino blogger.
Cannot fucking wait. Cannot fucking wait. Excellent.
I'm Helen Anderson,
And I'm Danny Howard.
and Devils in the Dark is back. So settle in for another season of truly shocking killers from horrific family annihilators.
Oh God, I don't want to know.
He was going to be the one who fathered all the new children in the world.
Women on a mission to murder.
Defo Grand Theft Auto, cheat me in a helicopter, I need a rocket launcher, got all my guns, got out my cars, motel rooms, yeah.
And everything in between.
Brand new episodes out 29th of August with new killers every Monday.
Search for Devils in the Dark on your favourite podcast app and make sure to follow so you never miss an episode.
See you soon.
Let yourself go this summer. Go adventuring, go day tripping, go for less with an advanced train ticket from Southeastern. You can book with confidence too, because if things change, we've got you covered. Make changes fee-free up to 6 p.m. the day before you travel. Book now at southeasternrailway.co.uk/go. Terms and conditions apply. Available on selected routes. Stations must remain the same and any price difference paid. Changes must be made before 30th of September 2022 and can be used for future journeys within 12 months.
And it's not only the past tense moments that make Mark look incredibly suspicious on the show. He also does a lot of distancing from Dylan. He refers to him by saying things like, that boy, which is incredibly uncomfortable.
Yeah, truly.
And when he does try to seem sad, saying things like, and this is a quote, it hurts me deeply, it tears me up, I'm lost in this world. It comes across as so disingenuous. Again, I know that people talk differently, they grieve differently, they're in shock differently, but everything he says seems so disingenuous. And Elaine just looks fucking ruined. If you can watch it, I did find part 2. There's 2 parts. I can't find episode 1, but I found part 2 on YouTube. I'll post it in the episode description below, but it might have been taken down by now. But if you do watch it, you'll notice that Mark so clearly, to me, and this is just my opinion, so clearly seems to be smirking throughout the entire thing.
I hate a smirker.
He's such a smirker. You just want to punch him. And you could argue that he's maybe smirking or smiling like that because he's nervous. Like, he is in a very, confrontational situation.
I mean, sure. Cameras do things to people. The camera does lots of things apart from at £10.
And also, he is on stage in front of a live audience with his ex-wife accusing him of having murdered his son. So, okay, you could say that. But to me, it comes across not like nerves, but it comes across to me like thinly veiled contempt.
Right.
It comes across like thinly veiled contempt for his ex-wife. And also, the classic look of a bit of a duping delight, which we've talked about on this show before. It's like this kind of uncontrollable smile that people who have committed atrocities and crimes and they are getting away with it, or they think they're getting away with it, are unable to stop themselves, almost like the corners of their mouths tilt upwards. And that's kind of what it feels like. He just, whatever it is, he can't stop doing it. And he also can't stop talking. And some of the things that Mark says on the show are quite weird, including the rather bold statement that he makes where he says, quote, "We all have to ask ourselves why he's gone, and we're all suspects here." But that just wasn't true. At the time, Elaine and Corey appeared on the Dr. Phil show, the police had no suspects. None of them were suspects at this point. Police certainly didn't think Elaine or Corey were suspects. So the fact that he's like, we're all suspects here, when none of them were suspects, is such a weird thing to say.
Well, it's like when incredibly rich people during the first lockdown were like, we're all in the same boat. Nope. You're in a yacht. I'm in a paddling pool with a hole in it.
Literally. Hannah was in a paddling pool with a hole in it. I loved it.
This Dr. Phil episode is cringeworthy from top to bottom, tip to toe, head to tail. And Elaine accuses Mark of being controlling, and she says that she knows him and how he hates to lose. According to Elaine, Mark's first instinct is always to hurt or get back at anyone he thinks has wronged him, which is very common in criminals in general, but killers especially, the sense of justice.
Because it's that kind of black and white thinking, and it's that, you know, again, we're not doctors, I can't diagnose Mark with psychopathy or anything like that, but it's that kind of predatory behavior of anyone who's in their way or anyone who's wronged them and feeling like it's justified to take them out.
Mark certainly seems to think that Elaine has wronged him because he accuses her of alienating the boys from him. I think you've done a pretty good job of that yourself, Mark. On the show, Corey won't even call Mark Dad. He just calls him Mark. So yeah, it's not Elaine who did the alienating. Mark was quite capable of managing that on his own. Corey also talks about Mark having a clear motivation for killing Dylan. That's a direct quote. And when asked what this is, Corey looks like he's holding something back and then just says that it was because Dylan didn't respect Mark and didn't look up to him, which infuriated their father.
When you watch it, it's so obvious. They're like, say, why would you say that he's got a clear motive? And Corey, it looks like he goes to say something. And it almost looks like he pulls himself back into his chair and then just says, well, you know, it's because Dylan didn't look up to him and Mark hated that. That's why. But you can tell he's holding something back.
And we will go on to discover, together holding hands, that Corey was indeed holding something back. But I'm sorry for blueballing you, my friends. We are going to have to get back to that in a little while. If you have any eating to do, I would advise you to do it in the next 10 minutes.
So the rest of the awful Dr. Phil appearance centres mainly around revelations of physical abuse levelled at Mark from his ex-wife Betsy, and also of Elaine begging him to tell the truth. But what's so clear is that Mark just cannot be reached. He really just looks like he absolutely hates her, and like he's enjoying Elaine's torment. When Elaine then asks her flinty husband, "Where's your emotion?" because he looks completely emotionless throughout his time on Dr. Phil, Mark replies, "What emotion are you trying to get out of me?"
That is the most infuriating response.
The man is
I want
is
you
awful.
to have a human emotional reaction to a situation that is very distressing. It's like when people are like, I don't know what you want me to say. I'm like, yes, you do. I love you. Let's get married. Let's run off into the sunset together.
So after this, Elaine and Mark, because Mark's accusing Elaine of kidnapping Dylan, and Elaine is obviously accusing Mark of having done something to Dylan. So the pair of them agree to take polygraph tests on the Dr. Phil show. Now, obviously, we all know, dear listeners, that polygraph tests are bullshit. Like we've talked about many a time on the show, and if you want more details, buy the book, that there is no universal response to deception, and certainly not a physical one. So the idea that a machine could detect that is illogical. All it can really detect is kind of stress.
It can just detect if you're clenching your butthole or not.
Yeah. While we all know it's bullshit, I do think there is something to be said for when someone doesn't know it's bullshit, and when they're asked to take a polygraph test, start acting incredibly anxious about it and not wanting to do it at all.
Which is the worst thing you could possibly do.
Yes.
Unclench those buttholes, my friend.
He cannot. So I think it's probably worth mentioning. So Mark basically says that he'll do it. And then he goes into the testing room and then starts to say that he's feeling unwell, that he can't do it. He hasn't slept. He's been drinking. And I think the main thing to state is the camera just is on Mark's face the entire time as he's saying all of this. I understand it's a high-stress situation, but Elaine does hers. Mark's like, he doesn't look like a man who's ill. He looks like a man who's terrified and filled with anger, in my opinion.
But great, exactly what you want in a father.
Precisely. Terrified and filled with anger. Who's also not been sleeping and drinking heavily.
As you can imagine, after this Dr. Phil special hit the screens of the nation, it stirred up a lot of exposure. But again, after a while, the case went quiet. Until June 2013, that is, 7 months after Dylan had vanished, when in the mountains surrounding Mark Redwine's home, police found a size 7 Nike Jordan, a sock, and some clothes. Cadaver dogs were brought in and they led investigators to Dylan's partial remains. However, all that was left of Dylan by this point was bones. And they were found scattered just off a dirt track on an isolated and rough part of the mountain. Dylan's skull was missing, and because of this, analysis of his remains was unable to definitively say what had been the cause of death. The only thing that they could conclude was that it was likely not an animal attack, presumably because Dylan's bones were still intact. Also, the biggest animals in the area are bears, which are definitely dangerous, but in November, when Dylan vanished, they would have been hibernating. After the remains were found, another search of Mark Redwine's house and his white Dodge truck was carried out in March 2014. This time, they found Dylan's debit card and an itinerary from his trip. Weird, since Mark had always said that he had nothing of Dylan's.
In June 2015, Elaine filed a lawsuit against Mark for wrongful death. Nothing really came of this at first, but on the 19th of August 2015, so just a few months later, 3 years after Dylan had vanished, Mark Redwine was finally officially named as a person of interest in the disappearance of his son. And a couple of months later, there was finally another breakthrough. In November 2015, a couple hiking off-trail found Dylan's skull around 5 miles from where his other remains had been discovered. And I also love that apparently the wife of the couple was a true crime fan. So when they spotted it, she's like, oh my God, it's a human skull. And she was like, don't touch anything, call the police.
Good for her.
Good for her, yeah, for sure. So the skull, when it was examined, showed clear signs of both blunt and sharp force trauma. The skull also indicated that Dylan had suffered skull fractures at the time of his death. The examining pathologist said, quote, I can't say that the cause of death is known. The only thing I know with reasonable certainty is that there is a perimortem fracture on the skull, and there are cut marks on the skull. Cut marks that would not have come from scavenging animals.
Finally, on the 22nd of July 2017, 5 years after Dylan vanished, Mark Redwine was arrested and charged with second-degree murder and child abuse resulting in death. And the trial was about to get wild. When it eventually got going, that is. Thanks to everybody's best buddy, COVID, there were major delays and even a mistrial. And it was also postponed because Mark's lawyer was arrested on a domestic abuse charge. That's who you want. Mm-hmm. Well, trash attracts trash, I suppose. At trial, Mark and his defense team stuck to their old story. Dylan had just run off or gone to visit his friends and had either been attacked by a wild animal or murdered by a stranger, that old chestnut. There were immediate issues with this. Firstly, how did Dylan arrange to meet his friends if he hadn't sent a single text after 9:37 p.m. the night before? And also, if he had just walked to his friend's house, as Mark said, well, the closest person would have been a boy named Tristan who lived nearly 6 miles away. Would Dylan really have tried to walk 6 miles in November in like the wilderness of Colorado? And also, Dylan's body was found without his wallet or his backpack, and his debit card was found at Mark's house. So that doesn't really fit with someone who's run away.
So regarding the cadaver dogs, which had triggered in Mark's house, on his clothes, in his truck, and in his washing machine, well, according to the defense, this was just junk science. And as for the blood found in Mark's house, the defense said that such an infinitesimally small amount of blood, that's the kind of amount of blood that's likely to be found in anyone's house, so it's inconsequential. And it didn't help because the blood samples were mixed and only one sample was exactly Dylan's. Like, that did muddy the waters a bit. But the thing is, I do think this is worth mentioning because this person testified, because Mark really didn't help himself with the blood situation. A La Planta detective testified in court that during his many interviews with Mark had repeatedly changed his story about where the blood had come from. First, he said that it was a cold sore that Dylan had had on his lip that was oozing blood. How much blood does a cold sore ooze, for God's sake? To spill onto the sofa and onto the floor.
It's impossible. It's just, no, absolutely not. I've seen some gnarly cold sores in my time. No. It's no, he really is not. It's as you say, Mark, stop talking.
Yeah, Mark, stop talking. Another problem with the cold sore story was that the detectives, when Mark told them that that's where he thought the blood had come from, told him, we can check with Elaine, Mark's mum, whether he had a cold sore or not when she put him on a plane. And then Mark changes his story and said that Dylan didn't probably have a cold sore after all. And then he goes on to say that actually he and Dylan had been throwing a football around and that Dylan accidentally got hit in the face with it and that's why he'd started to bleed. Mark and Dylan do not have the type of relationship where they're throwing a football around. And also it contradicted what he had said previously was that Dylan hadn't been injured and he didn't know where the blood had come from. So why is he now saying this? Nothing makes sense, and obviously the prosecution went after these inconsistencies hard. And they also had some pretty damning testimony up their sleeves.
Brandon, Mark's eldest son from another marriage, took the stand and said that Mark had called him on the day that Dylan's skull had been found. And apparently, he was totally emotionless and kept saying things like blunt force trauma. According to Brandon, Mark was telling him what had happened to Dylan, even though the family had no information at all at this stage as to how Dylan had died. The court also heard from a bank employee who testified that in January 2013, Mark moved $2,000 from Dylan's savings account into his. Other witnesses also spotted an ATV that looked a lot like Mark's, driving around up in the spot where Dylan's remains were found a few days before they were discovered.
I'm Helen Anderson.
And I'm Danny Howard.
And Devils in the Dark is back. So settle in for another season of truly shocking killers from horrific family annihilators.
Oh God, I don't want to know.
He was going to be the one who fathered all the new children in the world.
Women on a mission to murder.
Defo Grand Theft Auto. Cheat me in a helicopter. I need a rocket launcher. Got all my guns. Got my cars. Motel rooms. Yeah.
And everything in between.
Brand new episodes out 29th of August with new killers every Monday.
Search for Devils in the Dark on your favourite podcast app and make sure to follow so you never miss an episode.
See you soon.
Let yourself go this summer. Go adventuring. Go day tripping. Go for less with an advanced train ticket from Southeastern. You can book with confidence too, because if things change, we've got you covered. Make changes fee-free up to 6 p.m. the day before you travel. Book now at southeasternrailway.co.uk/go. Terms and conditions apply. Available on selected routes. Stations must remain the same and any price difference paid. Changes must be made before 30th of September 2022 and can be used for future journeys within 12 months.
And there was yet more suspicious behaviour. The area's deputy fire chief testified that on the night of the search for Dylan, as rescue teams had been scouring the woods around Mark Redwine's house, at around 11 p.m, Mark had turned all the lights off in his place. What?
He's not helping himself. He really is not. He really is causing a lot more trouble for himself than he needs to.
Even if you put aside the fact that most parents at this point would probably have been out in the woods looking for their child, screaming their child's name, the idea that you wouldn't leave all of the lights on in your house, whether you look at it kind of practically or symbolically, is very, very odd. Now, of course, all of this is just circumstantial evidence, really. The cadaver dogs and the blood, okay, but there wasn't really anything specifically concrete. However, as we have said on this show many a time, circumstantial evidence is evidence. And Mark Redwine's behaviour, general lack of answers or interest in anything, plus the fact that Dylan was with him and then went missing from his house, does make him look quite guilty. Now, as you guys will probably all also know, is that at trial, the prosecution do not have to offer a motive for why they think the defendant committed the crime. Motive is not necessary. But generally speaking, the prosecution will offer up a narrative to paint a picture and build a solid case to convince the jury. So, although a motive is not needed, the prosecution do often do it because it's very helpful. It's quite hard to convince a jury of why something happened or that something happened if you can't even hint at why you think it happened. And the motive that the prosecution at the trial of Mark Redwine brought up, well, it's a doozy.
The word doozy is another one that I dislike. It just doesn't hit my ear right. If you would all care to cast your minds back to the Dr. Phil episode that we went through earlier, you might remember us saying that it felt like Corey Redwine was holding something back when he claimed that his father had a clear motivation to kill Dylan. Corey didn't expand on the show, presumably because it was part of the agreement to get Mark Redwine on the stage. Obviously, such promises are not made when you're on trial for murder. And Corey used his testimony as an opportunity to go to town on his dad. This is where the no-eating comes into play. In 2011, Corey and Dylan had both been on a road trip with Mark. One night, they were in a hotel room. Mark was asleep and the boys were on his laptop. And on this laptop, they found some images. They were of their dad, Mark, dressed in a red bra, wearing a soiled nappy. Diaper for our American listeners. And then it gets quite a lot worse, I'm afraid. There were photos of Mark eating the feces in the nappy and rubbing the contents of the nappy all over his mouth and face. Thank you so much for putting that in my bit.
You're welcome. Corey and Dylan were obviously mortified. Corey even apparently took photos of these pictures on his phone. Now, I really did try to understand, but it didn't seem that clear to me when the boys actually confronted their father with these images, like whether they did it that night or whether they did it later. But according to Corey, his and Dylan's relationship with their dad was shattered that night. In August 2012, a year after the photos were discovered, Corey, and we know that this happened, so they must have confronted him by this point, texted his dad, calling him a, quote, shit-eating coward, and also telling him, you are what you eat.
And it was also around this time, so just a few months before he disappeared, that Dylan had texted Corey and asked him to send him those photos so he could show him, meaning Mark, who he really is. It's not clear if Corey sent the images or not. At first he said he didn't, and then he said he did.
If Dylan did confront his dad with these pictures, or try and blackmail him with them to get out of maybe going to visit him anymore, could this have been the clear motivation that Mark had apparently had for killing Dylan, according to Corey, as he had hinted at on Dr. Phil? Well, that was the narrative that the prosecution went with, that Dylan had confronted Mark about the pictures, and in a violent rage, Mark had beaten and stabbed Dylan in the head and killed him. The court was also shown the photos of Mark in the nappies. Basically, on courts.state.co.us, you can get access to all of the exhibits that were used in this trial. Like, it's all like freely available. And I did go on there, and I'll leave a link below in the episode description.
She also forced me to look at them by the way.
I did. Well, if it was going to be in my head. And,
we're nothing if not a team.
Yeah. And if you really do want to see these pictures of Mark Redwine, then cast your eyes to Exhibit 17 and onwards. And good luck.
We can't know for sure if this was the reason, as Mark refused to say anything. The defence couldn't claim it wasn't Mark in the pictures or that Dylan hadn't seen them, so they just said that the photos had nothing to do with anything. The defence argued that any negative feelings Dylan had towards his dad, because they also couldn't pretend that that wasn't the case, was purely down to the contentious custody battle between his parents and Elaine alienating her son from his father. According to the defence, Dylan had also brought up the pictures with Mark before, and Mark hadn't murdered him then, which at best is weak reasoning, at worst completely ridiculous. And it's especially ridiculous when you consider that two of Elaine's friends who went to Mark's house shortly after Dylan had vanished made fun of Mark about the pictures, and he chased them off his property with a log.
Yeah, so he's not like totally chill about it.
And it's not like nobody knows.
No. So in the end, the jury were convinced by the prosecution. And on the 16th of July 2021, 9 years after Dylan went missing, they found Mark Redwine guilty. And he was sentenced to 48 years in prison. Mark Redwine still continues to claim that he is innocent. But I have to say, in my opinion, I do think the right decision was made.
So we at Red-Handed Towers are pretty sure that the murder was probably not pre-planned, but a heat-of-the-moment incident. Most likely because of those now infamous pictures permanently burned into my brain. Dylan was 13, and if you read his texts and social posts, he was a typical bolshy kid. Normal 13-year-olds give their parents rage-fueled tongue lashings. And after finding those pictures, given the issues between Mark and his mum, Elaine, and also since Dylan had been forced to go and stay with his dad against his will, it's likely that Dylan let rip, and that Mark, known for his temper, lost it. According to those around him, Mark was self-centered, controlling, shame-filled, and had a history of failed relationships, so he wasn't exactly winning any awards for being the most well-adjusted person on the planet, as well as losing every year at the Dad Awards.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's talk about the pictures. Because obviously, look, we're not here to like kink shame anybody. You want to do that, like, you know, do what you want. That's fine. But the condition of coprophagia, which is the practice or desire to eat feces, or the paraphilia of coprophilia, which is, of course, gaining sexual pleasure from the eating of feces, and it causing the person engaging in the behavior or someone else involved distress, are generally considered as behaviors warranting treatment. That's not me saying that. Mm-hmm. That is psychologists and psychiatrists saying that it's not like the best. But I guess the more interesting questions to ask, not so much like why was Mark Redwine doing it, because like we don't know. It's just what turned him on, clearly. But why did Mark Redwine take those pictures? He seems in those pictures to be on his own. So he's taking them to then look at those pictures and relive it? I mean, maybe. But if so, why on earth did he put those pictures on a laptop and then let his sons use that laptop?
He's sending them to someone. Of course.
Yeah,
why else do you take
that's
pictures
true.
of yourself?
Yeah.
Whatever happened, the murder of Dylan Redwine is such a sad, sad story. Elaine is obviously destroyed and unable to square in her own head how Mark could have done this. And we thought what she said after the trial was so heartbreaking. She said, "I thought he was safe. He was with his dad." So it's pretty clear that Mark did kill Dylan. As to why, probably partly for the confrontation that we suspect did go down, but maybe also as a way to punish Dylan for siding with his mum, and also a way to punish Elaine for leaving him. So there you go. There you have it. The story of a tragic death and some really unpleasant images that we can never forget.
No, so good luck with that. If you must, follow the link below and take a look at those pictures. You know, I'm not going to suggest for or against it. You do you. And have fun and live with the consequences.
But don't come crawling back to us.
No, don't do that. Don't do that. Go check out Sinister Societies exclusively on Spotify. Come follow us at patreon.com/redhanded, where you can get your hands, eyes, ears, feet, whatever else you want on loads of delicious bonus content from us every single week. Have yourself a Merry Christmas in about 6 weeks' time. I don't know what I'm saying. I'm so tired. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who came on tour. Because that would have happened by now.
What was it like? Tell us. We don't know yet.
Yes. Unless you had a horrible time and got diarrhea or food poisoning or something, don't tell us. That's all I've got on my mind now. Let's get off this topic. Bye, guys. We'll see you next time.
Bye.